And welcome to this week's episode of the Dr. Tech Show, where myself and Sweyn Hunter guide people to the world of online communications in a show where we talk tech, a show which was the brainchild of the late great internet evangelist John Popham. And we're joined today by Ivor Tymchak from Bettakultcha, who's going to tell us a bit more about himself. But we'll start with the usual way and talk about how's the weather where you are. So, Sweyn, you can start for a change. How's the weather where
It's
you
a
are?
beautiful day here in Orkney. The sun is shining. It's freezing cold. There's ice on the ground, but it's beautiful.
Good, good. Well, we had snow this morning in Birmingham, would you believe? I looked out the window of the office here, and there was snow. There's light dusting of snow on several surfaces. So,
Wow.
that was amazing to see. I took a picture just to remember because that might not happen again. And Ivor, how are you? And how's the weather where you are?
I'm very good, thank you, Pauline. It's foggy here. It's like some Victorian scene and an Atkinson Grimshaw painting, for those of you familiar with his moody works. But I'm good. We had a Bettakultcha event last night in tribute to John Popham, and that went very well. So I'm high from the event.
Excellent. We're going to hear more about that in a few minutes, but we'll just go to our usual things that we do, and as usual we look to see what's been commemorated around this time of year. And obviously we've just celebrated for many people Christmas, Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, and we'll hear about how that went for everybody. But today apparently is card playing day.
Wow.
And I don't know where about you guys, but when I was growing up, card playing was a big thing around on Christmas, and I'm not sure this is a real celebration that is a lot of celebrants, but I'm very happy to commemorate card playing day and to bring it to other people's attention. When we were kids, we played cards a lot with my great aunts, and what was the game we played? Old Maid. Old Maid was one of them. My my brother didn't like that one very much because he didn't used to win. But other members of the family were quite fun. When you're like this, I find it hard to remember games we played, but Snap and other ones. So have you got any family memories of card games, Sweyn?
Yes, we've played cards a lot. The game Hearts, where you try not to win any tricks with hearts in them. Beggar Your Neighbor, as it's called. Uno, although that's not really played with playing cards. Yeah, all sorts of games.
Yeah, Beggar My Neighbor is one we played as well, and one my dad introduced us to when we were in our, I don't know, it was 12 or 13, called Sevens, where you have to play all the suits, but one each one you can hold back cards.
Oh yes.
So that was very exciting for us. We thought Dad had invented this game. Very exciting. What about you? Are you a card player?
I was just remembering an incident at school when I was at school there. We had a card school going, and I'm ashamed to say that I marked the deck. So me and my friend had a scam going whereby we could cheat the game. But when we were children, we didn't play any card games or board games. We were so poor because my parents were both Ukrainian immigrants that cards wasn't on the agenda at all. It was only when I got to school that I discovered, people play this game. So I try to take advantage of it, shall I say?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm sure we'll hear more about that later. I mean, obviously people can play cards online now, and as we encourage people to get online, card playing, I think, is one of those things where it's one of those, as John would have said, you find the thing that interests people, and then you show them how they can do that online. So that would have been something he encouraged, I think. So Ivor, let me do a bit of an introduction to you for people who don't know you, and this is all stuff I've got from your website, so it has to be true. So you're a speaker and trainer and a creative presentations coach and CEO of Bettakultcha. You studied filmmaking at Sheffield University, and having made several films, you went on to create and write a strip cartoon called Life and How to Live It for a national music paper called Sounds. You formed a rock band that toured Germany, Czechoslovakia, and Holland, and you put out a 12-inch single, which was Single of the Week in Sounds, and a CD album before moving on to other projects. Your interest in performance compelled you to try stand-up comedy, and you reached the regional finals in various comedy competitions, and you still perform stand-up because it's such a good learning ground for presentation skills. You ran your own graphic design business for many years before earning most of your income from live caricature work, and subsequently became interested in passing on some of your experience and developing a workshop for encouraging creativity in the workplace, which is used by Unilever, amongst others. So welcome to the show, Ivor, and we're very, very pleased to have you, especially as you knew John Popham. And as you say, last night we just celebrated his life on a Bettakultcha. Was that a Bettakultcha special, or was that a kind of a program, something that you were going to do anyway? Yeah.
It was a special for John. When he died, I thought, well, we need to remember him in some way, because the funeral was restricted to 15 people or whatever it was, and there were so many people who would have turned up if they had the opportunity, that I thought, well, let's do something online. And John was such a fan of Bettakultcha, it just seemed like the perfect way to do it.
Yeah, it was very nice because John is gone since the end of September now. Is it 3 months today? September, October, November, 4 months, September, October, November, December. 3 months today, I think, or about today. And some of his family may be listening now. I know they were at the Bettakultcha event last night. And so can you tell us a bit, Ivor, about your and John's involvement with that and Bettakultcha generally? You were telling us a great story before the show came on about how it started and how you got involved. Can you tell us that?
I was invited to give a talk at something called Bettakultcha, or Bettakultcha as it's called in some areas of the globe. And I was taken up with the format. I thought this is a really good format, which is 20 slides lasting 20 seconds each. So that's a talk of 6 minutes 40, if my maths is correct. And it's such a snappy format that I thought, oh, let's do this in Leeds, because it was in Manchester where I was invited to do the talk. But when I researched it, I discovered that it was a trade name, Bettakultcha, and you had to have a license to use it, and only one city could have a license. So we discovered that it was the architectural department in Leeds University that had the license. So we couldn't. A friend of mine that we decided to do it together with, we couldn't use it, so we couldn't call it Bettakultcha. So in the end, we decided to do our own thing and just call it Bettakultcha, which kind of made more sense in the language, because people would interpret it as better culture. And we shortened the length of the slide duration to 15 seconds. So it was even shorter. It was a 5-minute talk. And we set it up that way. But the innovations that we made was that we made the transition from one presentation to another seamless. Because all the events I'd been to previously, it was a case of the new presenter coming up with their laptop, the previous presenter unplugging, and then the new presenter plugging in, and there's a hiatus where the tech gets sorted out, the audience gets a bit restless, and then start chatting, and then you have to sort of bring them together again. And often there isn't a compare, or it's someone who doesn't really know what they're doing, and they're just kind of, excuse me. So the big innovation that I insisted on was, let's have a compare. And of course, I volunteered myself because I'm such a show-off. And so we put all the slides.
I think there's a picture of you there on your website, on the Bettakultcha website. They're comparing. I think that's what you're doing.
In the red shirt,
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And so all the slides were sent in prior to the event, and we put them all on one file so that the tech person could just simply push the button and it went on to the next person. And I would introduce the next talk, which, to be honest, was a skill in itself, because sometimes you would get a really flippant talk, lots of swearing, lots of jokes. And then the next presentation would be some tragic story that involved death and what have you. So I had to kind of prepare the audience for, right, our next present, etc., etc. So it was a great learning platform for me as well. And so that's how Bettakultcha started out. And John, he was one of the early attendees. And as soon as he saw it, he thought, this is fantastic. because it involves tech, it tells stories, and it's short and snappy. So he immediately volunteered himself to video the events, the talks, and put them up on his website, and that's how it started out. And it was such a great bloke, was John, because he was so enthusiastic about the whole tech thing, and he was so efficient as well. Within hours, the talks would be online, and people were like, "Whoa, he's there," you know. So, yeah, great guy.
So how long ago was it?
He had a great trick of concentrating on the content and getting that across without worrying to any excessive degree about the actual technicalities of it all. And that's why he could do it quickly, I think.
Yes, the content was more important than the stuff.
Sorry, Pauline, I interrupted.
No, I was just asking how long ago it was that John was, when did he start being involved?
The Bettakultcha has been running for over 10 years now, so I'm pretty sure it was the first year that he, I think he was at the first event, actually, the very first event, which was at Temple Works in Leeds. For those of you that don't know Temple Works, it's a grade 1 listed building, which only architectural students from all over the world seem to visit, because it's the facade is designed in the style of some Egyptian temple, and it's like, what on earth is this building doing here in the industrial heart of Leeds? So anyway, that's by the by. So the first event was like this cultish thing, where we were, we knew about this this particular building, and it was taken over by someone called Susan Williamson, who was turning it into an arts venue. So we were one of the first events to be in there, and it was it was a fantastic event. And John was immediately onto the event.
And it seemed last night that some of the people who were there have been involved with the Bettakultcha scenario for quite a long time. Have you got some people who've been with you for many years?
Yes, a few of the presenters last night were presenters who've been presenting throughout the Bettakultcha history. So they've done lots of presentations, and invariably they're fantastic presentations. So they had lots of ideas, so they were quite keen to volunteer themselves. Sometimes we'd invite them, particularly if it was a special event, we'd say, would you present? And we started to compile an A list of presenters who we knew could deliver. The presentations were always good, they were always confident, etc., and they were just fantastic speakers. I even had the idea of creating like an agency of these Bettakultcha speakers, so that firms could hire them, and they would get 10, they could get say 8 or 10 presentations for the price of one speaker that they would normally pay to fly in and just talk their usual shtick, whereas these presenters could actually focus on their particular issue. Anyway,
so in terms of what the presentations are, I mean, are there any guidelines, any rules, any what are the presentations? What do people choose to speak about?
Interestingly, one of the reasons that Bettakultcha became such a phenomenon in Leeds was because there was no censorship. You could talk about anything you wanted, and when people sent their slides in, we just saw their slides. We didn't know what they were going to talk about. We got a feel for what the subject was from the slides, but it was only when they actually presented that we heard what they were going to say. So there was no kind of, oh no, you can't say that, you can't do that. It was an open platform, and people respected that. So we never got anyone who said anything that was outrageous, or because the premise always was, if you have an opinion or a view that is in opposition to the majority, you have to justify it. And after you've delivered your presentation, you have to stick around in case someone from the audience wants to ask you some questions about what about this or whatever. So that was the understanding. And there was one occasion where an incident occurred that was controversial. And so there was a big kind of outcry about it and brouhaha. And we were a bit worried about it, to be honest, because we thought, well, this is our first instance of where maybe we might have to impose censorship. But I wrote an article about it and explained where we were coming from and how we viewed the event. And we invited people to give their opinion about how they wanted to see it. And overwhelmingly, the people said, no, leave it censor free. We will be the arbiters of what is acceptable and what is unacceptable, which I thought was fantastic. Because although we try to, when I was comparing in between the presentations, if anything was said that was kind of, ooh, that might be a bit, I would try and ameliorate it with a flippant comment or whatever. But the audience were the police. Because if they didn't like something, they would let them know. They were vocal about it, and so that's the risk that people took. So, in a sense, it was kind of self-policing. So I was really pleased about that aspect to it.
I heard last night you gave a shout out for Tom Forth.
Yes.
Yeah, because Tom is someone I know through my work on open data.
Great guy.
He used to live in Birmingham, and I had him speak recently, just this last year, in fact, at West Midlands Open Data Forum, which I chair, on the index of multiple deprivation for the area. But yeah, so how do you know Tom, and what's his involvement with Bettakultcha?
Well, he's on the A list of speakers. Fantastic speaker is Tom, and he always does his research, so his data is rock solid. But Tom approached us and said he'd heard about this event in Scandinavia somewhere that celebrated the importance of failure. And this event happens every year. And he said, would you like to do something similar with Bettakultcha? And so we came up with the theme of the importance of failure. And we normally charged per ticket. But because it was this new event, we thought, okay, we'll let people pay what they want as an experiment. If it fails, then, it's kind of where we're living the philosophy. And so Tom was behind that, really. And to be fair, it was one of the best events that we'd had because it allowed people to come on stage and actually describe where things had gone wrong. Because, you regularly see motivational talks where people talk, oh, this went well and I did this and I fought through, and you don't hear the other side of the story where the majority of people suffer failure or a setback. And actually you learn the most from stories like that. If you see a good actor on screen, you don't notice the acting because you invest into the character. It's only when you see a bad actor that you think, it's not very good, this, is it? Why is that? Oh, I see. They're not doing this with conviction, and you're learning from their mistakes. So in the same way that when you see a bad speaker who just, for example, just reads their slide off the screen, which is full of bullet points and text, you think, why is this boring? Maybe it's because I can read what they're reading out and it's not achieving anything. So you learn an awful lot from people who are making mistakes. And so the importance of failure event was really, really interesting. I'd like to resurrect that, to be honest, and make it an annual thing. But yeah, he's a great guy.
Yeah, Tom's very good value for money. I have had him at as I say, West Midlands Open Data Forum, and he's spoken previously. We do a national an event every year for Open Data Day, which is the first Saturday in March, and he comes to those events as well, and kind of gets people, he does his presentation on bus transport or whatever, things that might not sound too fascinating to other people, but he's a very good speaker and makes it all very well worthwhile, and his data work is excellent, of course. So and
he relies on data. It's once or twice I've been tripped up by Tom, who I've got my beliefs or opinions about something, and he said the data says, and it's like you can't argue with the data.
No, the data don't argue with Tom.
So I've had to change my view on something and think, oh well, if that's what the data is, which of course is one of the problems we have today, is that people just don't respect the data.
Yeah.
It's like they've got their beliefs, their opinions. The data doesn't matter, which is a tragedy.
Yeah. Well, Ivor, it'd be good to hear a bit about your kind of early career and sort of how you came to where you are now. It's always interesting for us to hear from our guests about how they got started in life and, you know, their journey. So we said a bit about you at the beginning of the show, but please elaborate on, you know, your early life and then what brought you to being CEO of Bettakultcha.
I didn't fit in when I was at school. I was the class clown, but I didn't have like a group of friends or a niche that I identified with. And I think my entire journey through life is trying to find a niche, my tribe. And I still haven't found it. So as I went through the education system and then a career, etc., I started to just experiment with different disciplines. So fortunately, I had a particular skill with art. And so the teachers would single me out and encourage me in that discipline. And it allowed me to escape what would have been my fate, if you will, because like I say, my parents were immigrants from Ukraine, working class, etc., etc. I went to secondary school initially after failing my 11 plus, but then was a late developer, as they called it, and then went to grammar school to do O and A levels. And that was one of the greatest lessons, I think, of my life, because when I went to secondary school, teachers referred to you by your first name. And the underlying assumption was that you would go into manual labor or a skilled trade. That's what it was. And when I moved to grammar school, the assumption was different. They used your surname. It was assumed you would go on to university, further education. And it was such an eye-opener that the system you go into tries to inculcate you into the way it thinks. Mm. And so that was something that I from an early age, I was aware of. And once you become enlightened like that, you notice it in everything you do. So the clique that you might fall into is self-reinforcing. So it's understood that the classic is journalism. Sorry if I'm going off on a tangent.
No, keep going.
The classic is journalism, because people think, I want to do good in the world, I want to report the truth, etc. But they get into a particular newspaper, and it's understood within the organization that everyone involved will behave in a particular way and think in a particular way, even though it may not be explicit. If you go against that, then you will immediately be found out, and your career might be stymied, or your stories might be, no, we won't do that. The editor will, whatever. And a lot of the journalists don't appreciate that. And it's only people like Peter Oborne, who used to work for the Telegraph, who became enlightened by the fact that he wanted to write a story about HSBC, the corruption within HSBC. Now, his editor said to him, I'm paraphrasing here, do you realize how much money HSBC spends on advertising through our paper? If you think we're going to rock the boat, you can forget it. And it was such an epiphany to him. He thought, actually, my chain only extends so far. Because he thought he was free, but it was only when he wanted to go beyond the boundary that he realized, no, I'm chained within this organization. So he left and wrote about, etc., etc. But that's I always invoke his name to sort of describe how the process works. But I mean, when you think about it, it's an obvious thing that whatever organizations you fall into, I mean, there'll be a lot of people who work for large organizations who will be able to describe the culture within the organization, and it's self-reinforcing. So if you don't fit in, you leave and go do something else. And I always discovered that I didn't seem to fit in anywhere. I was always coming up with arguments about why, it's not like that and it should be like this. But because I had this artistic bent, I developed my creativity. And part of that skill is being able to reinvent yourself every so often. So I went to film school because I loved the idea that you could manipulate an entire environment. You had music, story, images, etc. Even though I was a painter originally, I moved on into film, and then I discovered that the film industry was dead men's shoes, really. To get on, you had to start at the bottom, get to know the right people, etc., and then wait until you were offered the job of whatever. So then I went to art school and got involved in rock and roll. I got interested in rock and roll. And so I thought, actually, music is one area where I could express my ideas, my radical ideas. Now, as it happens, the music industry is one of the most conservative areas you can go into, because I actually went to see somebody from the music industry, trying to further my career. And he actually said, but you don't look like a rock star. And I thought, crikey, you have to wear a uniform to get into it. Right. It was just, anyway. So we had a certain amount of success, and then I experimented with stand-up comedy. Because again, when you analyze what comedy is, it's about acceptance. The comedians you see on stage have got troubled backgrounds. Almost invariably, there's something going on. They're fighting some battle. And they do comedy as a means of gaining acceptance with an audience. It's about being accepted for who they are. Mm. So that was kind of one of the things that made me want to do comedy. I mean, I didn't want to do it professionally. I just wanted to make a room full of people laugh. That was my goal. Eventually, I managed to do it. And there was another great lesson there, actually, which I'll share with you if I may. And it's that anyone can learn to be a comedian. Anyone. And so often I get people who, when I do training, they say, oh, I'm not a presenter. I don't have the confidence. And it's like, it's just practice. Mm-hmm. In the same way that people say, oh, you've got fantastic artistic skill. It's God-given. No, it's hours and hours of practice. And I've actually seen comedians who started out, who, were dying a death, not a single laugh. And a couple of years later, I've seen them slaughtering an audience. Absolutely hilarious. And it's just through stage time. That's all it is. So anyone can, within limits, learn to do a skill. It's just a practice. Now, a lot of people don't have the will or the wherewithal to think, well, I'm not going to spend that time practicing to such an extent. So they don't do it. But I just wanted to achieve that particular level of, I'll make a room full of people. And it gave me the confidence to do things like comparing, appear on shows, whatever. Just have the confidence to believe in who I am. Actually, I've just had an epiphany there. Maybe ultimately you have to accept who you are. Maybe that's what we're all trying to do when we're looking for our tribe or whatever. It's just accepting who we are. So then the graphic design business was something that made money, because none of the other activities made any money. I could get by, but it didn't make any real money. So the graphic design business made some money. And then the Bettakultcha thing occurred, and I got into training from that side of it, because people, they would see the Bettakultcha event and me comparing and then say, oh, could you help some of my students or my staff to present better? Yeah, sure, of course. So that's how I've now sort of come into this game of training and learning online skills, because I'm learning online skills as well. I bought some lights and set up the camera at eye level, etc., just to try and be a bit more professional about how I present online.
Excellent. That's a really good story of kind of how you've got to where you are. Are there any particular things, during the periods of lockdown that you've learned or helped other people to learn about being online? Because obviously that was one of John's big passions.
I've learned something today, Pauline. I've just developed something that, because last night I was talking to the camera that's mounted on a tripod, and I don't get any sense of I'm talking to anybody human with this, because it's just a black blob of a tripod. So today I thought, I wonder if I tape a picture of my daughter just behind the camera, that might help. So I'm actually looking at someone who's human that I love, etc. And so that might help me to be a bit more human when I'm talking to the camera.
That's a great idea.
So that might be a tip for people if they think, oh, just take a little picture of someone you love behind the camera. So every time you look at the camera, you're seeing the face of someone that you care about, and then that will help you to deliver a more authentic presentation. I also like standing up when I give a talk, because if you're giving presentations regularly, presumably you will be standing up when you deliver the talk. That's your training. So the online stuff is a little bit you have to be careful with it, because invariably you'll be sitting down when you're doing things. So when it's time to present, if you continue to sit down, you don't really get the sense of, no, this is a performance. I need to get ready for this. So if you practice the idea of, when I'm giving a talk, I will stand up. Now you need to organize your setup so that you can do that. But when you stand up, it's a different feel. You know you're going to perform, so you give a better presentation when you do that. So little things like that you pick up on the way, and gradually you learn, yes, I can do this. Now, sorry, just one other thing. Just stop me if I'm going on too long, Pauline. But I was watching a comedian online. I'll name check him, Rob Rouse, very funny guy. But he gave me the idea that actually you can use the frame of the image and play around with it. You can use your activity. So he uses he paints a face on his thumb or his finger. He's pretending they're characters. He had like a doll's head or something with a wig on it, and he pretended one of his children was walking underneath the frame, because you could just see the top of their head with it, and he was chatting to them and I thought that's really, really clever. You can be creative about the medium, just so it's interesting for the viewer, because ultimately they're just watching TV, aren't they, when they're watching something? So the content,
or in this case, even just listening to Hope Radio, and where all the best pictures are.
Exactly. So the way that you can make it more interesting, then use it, so that people will be attentive to what you're saying.
Just going back to what you were saying about tribes and so on, and the having to fit in. So, are you aware in kind of the technological world that there's a tribe that has to be fitted in with, and how would we recognize it, and what would we do to try and blur the edges slightly if we were to find it?
Can you just describe a bit more about what you mean about?
Well, in terms of this stuff that we're all doing, we're trying to help people get online. We're trying to help people get adequate devices and data and skills to actually use the technology in their daily lives, either to entertain people or to get their banking done or whatever it is. Have you come across anything general about the technological world that we should perhaps examine and try and blur the edges of?
Now I live in a contradictory position, because I'm very much critical of big tech. And I don't even have a smartphone, because I don't want to be carrying around this security device for the authorities to know exactly what I'm doing. So I refuse to carry a smartphone. So I'm actually, to a certain extent, against tech. Or rather, I police it as best I can. So I don't know a great deal about tech. What I do is I ask people who do know something about it. And I discover they're very willing to help me decide on, to choose a piece of equipment, or they might recommend this, or they'll explain about this, etc. So if you talk to the humans, they're very helpful. But tech in itself, I think, is you can either get carried away with it and get stuff that you don't really need. It's a case of working within the medium, but not allowing the technology to overwhelm what you're trying to achieve. Because what we're doing here is trying to talk to each other as human beings, trying to have a conversation. That's it. And the technology is merely allowing us to do that. So you don't want the technology to interfere with that human conversation if you can.
Mm.
So that's my position.
I liked what you said about speaking standing up, because I studied journalism myself a couple of years ago at BCU in Birmingham, and one of the most interesting sessions I ever spent was with somebody who was teaching us about presenting and standing up. It is about being performer, but also if you're breathing, you can take more breath into your lungs when you're standing up than if you are when you're sitting down. And when I did one of my assessment pieces, which was just a two-way to a radio in a radio station, I made sure that I was standing up, because it just comes across better. So I think, Sweyn, I'll be looking into a standing desk here, among other things that we were trying to look into. Which brings me on to.
I think I've got a taller box to set my computer on. That'll do me.
Yeah, something like
That's a
that.
good tip, actually. Just raise the camera to eye level.
Yeah.
That immediately changes the way people perceive you.
Sitting down though I am, it's about that high up on a pile of books at the moment. But it's Christmas. There's lots of empty boxes lying around. We can soon build a standing desk.
Yes, no problem. No, I was going to say about one of the things that I've noticed that John talked about in some of the early episodes of the Dr. Tech show that we did, was about the Facebook portal, which is obviously around Christmas time, had some more promotions. And more people are getting to it. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, Ivor, but it's like a set-top box where people can communicate with family and friends. And unlike other video calling devices, it follows you around the room, so you don't have to worry about positioning yourself in the screen, because it'll find you, where when you're talking. And I've noticed a lot of people, more people have got these for Christmas than. Well, obviously, it's a good time to buy things for people than would have had previously. And in fact, there's a Facebook portal users group on Facebook, of course, which I discovered a couple of days ago, because I thought, oh, that's a good idea. I'll set one of those up. But then, first of all, obviously, I looked to see if there was one already, and there was one already. And I invited Sweyn to join. I invited John, RIP, to join as well, because his family still are still keeping his Facebook page open, and I think they would find it of interest. But I'm going to go through the portal group, some of the conversations people have had already, because people are still asking questions about how do you do things. So it's one of the devices that we're going to talk a bit more about. We're keen to get somebody to offer us a demonstration model. John was always happy to try things out, I think, and write about them. And one of the things that he tested on the show again in a previous episode was a Huawei 5G, what do you call it, Sweyn? Mi-Fi, some sort, because when he was in hospital, he wasn't able to get.
It was an access device to 5G that would give you a hotspot wherever you were.
Yeah. So somebody did give him one of those to test when he was in hospital one of the times, Ivor, and he was gleefully telling us how he got on with it. I mean, I don't know if you had a chance to see any of the previous Dr. Tech shows, but John would pop up sometimes from outside hospital, or kind of when he was waiting for a bus or a taxi or something. So Sweyn's put on screen now the Portal by Facebook user group, and it has 5.7 thousand members, over 5,500 members now, and I think it's going to be just going to grow. And it's it's the kind of thing we want to encourage people to be able to get to help each other by being in groups like that. Sorry, I just wanted to plug that, because it's the kind of thing John would have been keen for us to give a mention to. So you say you don't carry a smartphone around, Ivor, but do you find yourself giving people help and advice kind of just as a matter of course?
Not on tech. I don't know enough about it. In fact, I do the opposite. I warn people about the dangers of tech. I don't have any.
I think more people should do that.
No. In all seriousness, they should, because kind of this window of naivety when social media appeared, and there was kind of no rules or anything. So all the positives were encouraged and were talked about, And there was no one who was saying, wait a minute, we need to be careful about this. Let's think about where this will end up. And so, because they didn't, the social media owners were able to grow to incredible positions of power. And it's only now that people are waking up to, wait a minute, you can actually influence the outcome of elections through social media. Isn't that a bit dangerous? That they're starting to wake up. And
it shouldn't have been a surprise, should it? Because every major technological advance has been similar. Oil, moving vehicles, electricity, they all create some fabulous benefit and some fabulous problems.
In fact, I recently wrote an article. I recently wrote an article about lead in petrol. How when it was first suggested to put lead in petrol to stop knocking, as it was called, people even then said, wait a minute, isn't lead poisonous? Is that a good idea? But, Big Oil came up with a campaign, but they didn't even call it lead, they called it ethyl or whatever. Right. And so they pushed it and the public just went along with it. So history has shown us, same with tobacco, same with asbestos, the benefits are always pushed. And it's only kind of decades later or a few years later that we discover, there's a downside to this as well.
The room service on this program, this is great.
Now, I do tend to think that probably the benefits outweigh the disadvantages, probably, but it's only, it's only marginal. So it was only in the last few years that I heard people talking against big tech, and I thought this is really interesting because it was almost suppressed to a certain, where would you hear anyone talking against social media? Certainly not on the mainstream media. You would have to search for it. It's only now that people are waking up to the dangers of it. So we need to be very careful about, hang on, do we actually need a smartphone? And invariably you see people, waiting at the checkout or whatever, just scrolling through their phone, and you think, is this how we should live our lives?
Yeah, I think what we found though on the program and John's kind of reason for starting the program was a lot of people were isolated and lonely, especially since lockdown, and so technology was offering them a way of communicating, not necessarily adopting everything, but just a way of communicating with people. And what we found, in the course of the show is that there are kind of 3 or 4 elements that kind of some people are lacking and that need to be addressed, which is, data poverty, people not having access to data, people not having access to devices, and people not having access to the skills to help them to learn about how to use these.
Some of the skills are precisely those to understand the environment that we're all now in. Yeah. To try and just as well to provide a kind of defense mechanism, almost the negative sides of what you're starting to use. If you drive a car, you need to wear a seatbelt. It's that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, we encourage a healthy skepticism, I think, about inaccurate news, inaccurate news reporting. And just
it's worse than that, Pauline. I feel I'm being bullied now by tech because previously when I used to drive into Leeds and park my car. And because I don't have a smartphone, I wanted to pay by cash at the parking meter. You can't do that anymore. It now demands that you use an app to pay for your parking. Now, if I don't have a smartphone, I'm excluded. I can't park in the centre of Leeds. And when it gets to that level, you think, wait a minute, this isn't exactly fair, is it? So I absolutely take your point about people who are isolated, especially the elderly or whatever. And I think perhaps the telecommunications companies could have said, okay, we'll allow people to make free telephone calls to wherever in the world. They could be sent something or whatever. So it's old technology that they're familiar with and they can use. They don't have to learn some new app. And also people have the choice then of sticking with technology that they're familiar with or switching to the more modern one. But it's when you are starting to be forced down a particular path, that's when alarm bells should ring.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, we have had stories recently on the show about the telecoms companies could have done more. I mean, certainly, I think they did offer was it free connections to people in the NHS and so on. But we come across more and more stories where free connections for certain reasons and for certain groups in society would seem to be a better way, because people are getting excluded all the time because they don't have access, and we need to find ways around that. But yes, encouraging people to be skeptical and be informed, I think would be something we and John would certainly encourage.
The Scottish government's currently consulting on the digital strategy for Scotland. I think it's just finished the consultation. But one of the main themes of that was no one left behind. And it kind of did nod towards that sort of thing that you're talking about, Ivor, that for certainly for most public services, there's got to be a way that you can access them in a way that is perhaps more recognizable from the past than it is a shiny bleepy thing in your hand that's always going off.
Yeah. And governments are they're always reactive, so they're years too late in realizing, wait a minute, they've got so much power, these companies now. Perhaps we should break them up or have something that oversees them or whatever. So
it's made particularly difficult by the global nature of the whole thing, that no one government really has the power. However powerful they are, no one government really has the power to.
Well, I mean, some countries now are saying, well, we're going to limit access to the internet. You can only access these, and of course they took advantage.
China's been quite good at that
for their tax purposes. So it goes, oh, well, we'll just pretend we're based in wherever, some tax haven, and we're not. So it's like they've got to wake up to the fact that, hang on, they're making billions and billions of pounds here or dollars without paying any tax on it, and we're missing out on the revenue, etc. So they have a big job ahead.
Sweyn, I wonder if we can look at some of the stories that we picked up over the last couple of weeks. There wasn't a lot over Christmas, I think, on digital inclusion, but we had some stories left over from previous
this is where I get
weeks,
to pick a tab at random and see if it matches what Pauline speaks about. It's almost like the random slide challenge.
Yes, that was good fun last night. Yeah.
That was another one of we invented that, so I'm really pleased.
Great.
That was great. Yes, really, really. I mean, I was tempted, but I was glad I didn't then, when the person who took it up was just so slick. It was really impressive.
So does Pauline have something?
Explain what the random slide challenge is?
That's a good idea.
Yes, please do, Ivor.
Well, when the formal presentations were finished with, we came up with the idea of inviting members of the audience to try and speak over slides they'd never seen before. So we restricted it to 10 slides, 2.5 minutes rather than 5, because we discovered that was probably about the optimum length of time. And sure enough, to our amazement, people volunteered to have a go. So an image would appear and off they'd go. They'd have to invent a story. And sometimes it was just absolutely sensational, but occasionally it did crash and burn, and you got someone who just got stuck and just described what they saw on screen. But
I'll tell you what it reminded me of. It reminded me of that game where you draw. First of all, you all draw the head of a creature, and then you fold the paper down and pass it on.
Oh yeah.
That game.
Yeah, no, I think that's. Have you copyrighted that, Ivor? Because I think that would be one that would other people would like to pick up on.
No, it hasn't actually. I don't know whether you can copyright that, but it is always invariable. It does go down well. Even when I do training sessions, I get people to do a random slide challenge. I just put up a slide and say, now just, people volunteer. There's no pressure on them. They always, when they've done it, their confidence level has shot up. And it's like, yes, I can do that. I can improvise. And it's such an amazing thing. I shouldn't be telling this because people might think, oh, I like my training goes. But it is such a wonderful thing when you see people grow in confidence when they've done it.
I love the Bettakultcha thing. It's kind of almost a contradiction in that the content is completely open, and yet the format of each presentation is completely fixed. I think that's quite interesting.
It's almost encouraging. it almost encourages people to be inventive. Think, well, if your palette is restricted, what images can you create with the few colors that you've got on there? And it's always amazing what people do. Sometimes people wear a costume, or we've had people who've sung. They've sung their presentation. So it's they've been incredibly creative as well.
Brilliant.
So,
Sweyn, have you got the story on the last story there on digital inclusion, the Connect 4 one?
I do.
I thought this was particularly interesting because they made some recommendations, which kind of echoes things we've talked about.
Yes, I have that here.
For
any minute now, I'll share it for you, Pauline.
Yeah, 4 organisations in Scotland, and we do hear a lot from Scotland because they're doing such great work around digital inclusion. But on the 26th of November, an organisation called People Know How gathered on Zoom to hear speakers from Ben Macpherson, who's the Minister for Public Finance and Migration and the MSP for Edinburgh, Northern and Leith, Gavin McLaughlin, Vice Principal and Chief Information Officer and Librarian at the University of Edinburgh, Claudia Baldacchino, Graphic Designer and Communications Officer, People Know How, and Adam Lang, head of Nesta Scotland, who was speaking on digital inclusion, in particular digital poverty. And the event was developed after their digital support grew in demand due to the pandemic. And they developed a response project called Computer Delivery, which has delivered over 900 devices to the community. And when devices are received, recipients can then join their Learn Digital project, helping to improve their digital skills to use the device, which makes complete sense. But they've got a series of recommendations based on the event that they did at the end of November that I thought were particularly interesting. And I've just taken the headlines of each of the recommendations, and they are to link internet access to public spaces, that is to libraries and other community areas, I think, which makes a lot of sense. Regulate internet service providers as a basic utility and stop overselling. As we've said previously on this program, it's not a luxury anymore to have internet access. It should be seen as a utility, and everybody should have access to it, everybody who wants it. They recommend you provide internet to tenants in social housing within rent costs, so to be included as part of their rent. It should be seen. I think anybody who's looking for a place to live these days, if there isn't internet access there and they want it, then they should be able to get it. They said they recommended making access to public service websites free of charge with no data or airtime required. And again, this is, people need their banking services or their NHS or their doctor. They should be able to not have to spend data charges on that. And then the final recommendation was to run a place-based pilot for all of this. And I think that would be something that I'd like to see recommended in some of the areas I'm working with in the Midlands. Sandwell, for example, is looking at digital inclusion opportunities, and that might be something I'd recommend to them. So this is their response to the Scottish Government's consultation paper on renewing Scotland's full potential in a digital world. And they're going to publish a full report in January. So we'll look forward to hearing more about that. And it's just great to see organizations get together to collaborate on the things that are so important to us these days. So well done to groups in Scotland for organising that. I don't know if we've got time for one more, Sweyn. Did any of the other ones jump out at you?
The one about people not having access to devices for home learning, that seemed like a...
Oh, that was the one, the US one? Yeah.
Yeah.
This was one we got. Oh, no, that was UK one. Sorry. Research by Teacher Tap on behalf of Teach First found 84% of schools in the most deprived quartile said they did not have access to enough devices or the internet to keep pupils educated at home, compared to just 66% of the least deprived schools. So that's a huge 84 to 66 is a huge gap there. Some schools did turn to local businesses or their academy trusts to provide devices, and that was in March. But the Teacher Tap survey found that schools within the most affluent intakes were 3 times more likely to have been donated tech than schools with the poorest pupils. So 60% of respondents in state schools said they would use the catch-up funding, which was 650 million from the government, to pay for devices and internet access for pupils, while 47% said that they would raid their pupil premium budget and 27% said they would use their reserves. One school, the Oak National Academy, which is an online classroom called the Oak National Academy, had 578,000 pupils use its services in the week of this story was written, which was about a month ago, which is a 38% rise on the week before. So the demand is there for pupils to use online resources. And the principal of the academy said these findings again reveal that too often it's the poorest students who are being left out, and they want to see coordinated action. They did find that about a quarter of the users using Oak were accessing it via mobile phone, and we know that not everybody's got a mobile. But also they need to be considered that one lesson uses around 250 megabytes of data. So that's 10 gig for 2 weeks isolation, which is an awful lot, especially if you've got more than one child. So Oak was in talks with mobile phone suppliers to zero rate educational websites, meaning the use of data on these sites would not be charged on a pay-as-you-go deal, nor count towards the user's mobile data allowance. And I think, we have to think that that's a good thing, that, just because you're disadvantaged in some way, that you shouldn't miss out on the education that is available. Ivor, have you? Sorry, go on, Sweyn. Ivor, have you got any contact with schools or young people, and are they affected by this sort of school situation at the moment?
I've got a daughter that is at college, and her lessons are online now, and my wife works in a school, and she sort of mentioned the fact that a lot of the children are from poor backgrounds, and they don't have a device, or there's only one. So if there's more than one child, then they're struggling. And I absolutely agree with what you were saying in the article, that the internet should be seen as an essential service like electricity, especially when you consider how you are being bullied now to use it. I mean, there are some companies, the only way you can speak to them is via the internet. You can't ring them up anymore. That's too expensive. So it needs to be legislated that, okay, the internet is part of, when you buy a house or rent a house, the internet speed is this, etc. So it's that balancing act of, okay, let's embrace the technology, but let's police it in such a way that it's a level playing field. I mean, that level playing field in itself is now a contentious issue, because there's always been talk of the big companies wanting greater access or greater speed with their particular service or product over other people. And the one defining principle about the internet is this: no one knows you're a dog on the internet. Everyone has, the same access. So as soon as they try and start streaming, the access to it, it's finished. It just becomes like any other, bricks and mortar service. So if they can get in quick and say, no, right, let's make it an essential service, blah, blah, then there's a chance it could be rescued.
On which hopeful egalitarian note, we should probably come to a close, because
let me just give you one final quote, Sweyn, because I was talking to Anne-Marie Naylor from Common Futures just before Christmas, and her thought, and she said I could quote her on this, is that there has been so far a missed opportunity to fund broadband connections and IT kit for deprived households. So I think the more people we know who are saying that in the places that they're saying it in, the better. So yes, thank you very much, Ivor. If people want to find you online, where's the best place?
If you just Google Ivor Tymchak, there's only 7 people in the country with the surname of Tymchak, so they will be able to find me. And just Ivor Tymchak will do it. I'm on Twitter, Facebook, and got a website as well. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much for coming on. It was really interesting. Yes, all the best.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.
And we'll say goodbye now. Thank you.
Goodbye. Thanks again.